bearing in mind, right, these are set questions that go to everybody, because a couple of them sound really odd for you. But generally, do you complain to a company if you have a faulty item or bad service?
Yes. No, sorry. I'm afraid I have to give you a lawyer's answer and say it depends. So there's a kind of cost-benefit analysis that takes place, which is how angry am I about this, and what time is it going to take for me to invest in it? By that, I mean investment, I mean two things. One, how practically long is it going to take me to write the letter, and what are their procedures and processes? And secondly, what the emotional time and cost is going to be. So am I likely to get a response and outcome where it's going to make me more angry than not to pursue this? And if it's something that's just a matter of principle that's worth £10, where I don't think there's a policy in place where I think it's going to interfere with the rights of another person, I'm just really angry about it. The reality is I'll generally sleep on it, and after 12 hours, probably not pursue it. So it depends on the assessment that I've conducted at the end of that experience. But it depends, right? So, for example, if I've had a really bad flight and I've paid good money that's often I've written to British Airways on a number of occasions. I have to say they have really great customer service. I'm happy for you not to broadcast that. I'm not saying they're a great, but I will say that they have. If I've paid a lot of money for a flight, and I mean the service, I have to say, has always been good on that airline, but where the food has been inedible, and I'm paying top dollar for that seat and all the rest of it because I don't really like flying, I'm a bit scared of it, so if I couldn't turn left, it just makes me feel less claustrophobic, and it's a lot of money. Of course I'm going to pay, but it is, my level of complaint is always commensurate with the cost of what I'm purchasing, and mindful of not being petty.
But when you say not being petty, is it also, though, about the principle of the thing, even if it is petty, but actually it's the principle?
I worry about that. Ultimately, you ask yourself the question, what do I want out of this interaction? And what I want is, let's say, in something that's gone wrong in some consumer things, I want a replacement or I want my money back. Okay. Now, let's say in that situation, somebody's refused to give me a replacement or my money back in breach of the law, even if it's £2. That's a principle of the thing that I'm going to challenge. I'm not going to challenge it for me as well. That's a principle that's worth challenging because it's not just me, it's other customers. And because it's the law and it offends my, and I hope everybody else's, innate sense of justice, plus know what I'm talking about and how dare you. So also interferes with my own individual sense of majesty as well, I'm sure as well. But I will absolutely, that is the principle of the thing. It's worth pursuing. It's a breach of the law. That matters, as I say, it's not my law, it's a company that's doing violence to something that's important to each and every one of us. Sometimes, however, the principle of the thing isn't the principle of the thing, it's just I'm a bit annoyed. And is it worth pursuing? What is that cost-benefit analysis I'm about to conduct? So there are limitless examples where I hear people go, well, it's not that, it's the principle. And I think, well, is that a principle that you're prepared to invest in? You've got finite amounts of emotional capital. You end up depleted. You're going to invest that money, emotional money, for the day, knowing you're not going to get a different outcome. To change what principle? What cost does it have to you personally? You'll get angry for sure, but it's not going to change the outcome or the policy of that particular company. So you need to be, I think, for me, let's say you're not asking for advice, you're asking about my experience. For me, it needs to be a principle that I can clearly see that has palpably been breached before I'll say it's the principle of the thing. It has to be a jolly confident principle that the person's breached.
Yeah, I think you probably answered this. The second question was, how much does the likely redress have to be before you will complain? But I think you've probably sort of,
well, yeah, but that depends on the likelihood. Again, I mean, there are all these variables, aren't there, that we throw into determining whether to complain or not. You know, if I'm, and I think the chief one, of course, is cost, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Certainly it's true of me. If I'm at an expensive restaurant and I've ordered a steak and I want it blue, alive and mooing, I'm sorry to your vegan listeners, that's just the way it is, and at least I'm honest about it. If that very expensive steak, which costs more than a blooming, certainly any of the clothes that I've got, believe it or not, which are chiefly secondhand, if it's not cooked that way, I'm going to send it back.
Yeah.
If, however, I passed a van where somebody's doing their very best to eke out a living and they're selling steak sandwiches and they're £5, of course I'm not going to send it back. The principle of the thing matters a great deal less in those circumstances. So I think you form a kind of common sense evaluation of the different things that inform the principle. It's a really posh way of saying how much it cost. Is it really a principle, right? Before I'm going to... has the person behaved in a way which has somehow, I think, interfered with the principle? In other words, I am going to complain if I get bad service somewhere. And that will matter.
Yeah.
But again, that all depends on the social and commercial circumstances of whatever I'm dealing with. I think there's any hard and fast rule. And if you are too rigid, those are people that really trouble me, you know, the type of people that will complain anywhere, you know, regardless of the cost, regarding, you know, you need to apply your mind reasonably and fairly according to the circumstances.
Now, this question is, I'm going to ask it because it's number 3, and I'm asking everybody else, but how well do you know your legal rights?
Pretty well.
You were right,
I did write a book about it, and I do write a column about it. And I think everybody else should as well.
Yeah. I think we could probably say that you know them. If you receive service that's over and above good, do you always give feedback?
Not always, but I really try to. It's such a good point. I'm really glad that you raised this, actually. If I've had really good service back in the days when you could go to a restaurant, so interesting, feels like years ago, I always make up, I don't always, so that's not true. I sound so interesting how often I place myself as the hero of my own narrative. But I do try to remember to make a point of speaking to whoever the manager is, to say, I've been served by, and always ask whoever the service name is, and say, I just want to say it's been really wonderful service. And from time to time, where I've had amazing service, I'll write, including customer service. And I've done it on a few occasions. In fact, I had it the other week from, I think, EE. I couldn't believe, I was like, I mean, granted, part of the reason is that I think we've got low expectations, a lot of these companies, that when you meet somebody that's really good, you're so overwhelmed. Yeah. You know, you think, oh my gosh, I must write, this has been so wonderful. You know, but taking the trouble, bearing in mind how underpaid and how often challenging it is to have a customer service facing role, to tell somebody just on the phone how good the phone call has been, is, I think, worth it. It costs nothing. Oftentimes I think to myself, I must write, but again, it's that cost benefit analysis. I think I'll either forget to do it, or it's going to take me half an hour and actually I've got something else to do that day. So I'm guilty of not doing that enough, I think.
I think it's very hard, isn't it, for people? I try to do it, obviously, in what I do, but I don't do it enough. I'd like to do it more. I certainly do it, but I do advocate people doing it, because I think it's really, really important. But if you receive poor service, how many people do you tell, including your social media?
I don't ever go online ever, and I mean, it would have to be catastrophic, bordering on violent of some description for me to share on social media. I mean, I often review the various musicals and, well, the theatre for serious newspapers under a pseudonym sometimes, or whatever, or on my own column. I will never ever review a musical or a piece of theatre and say it's terrible, unless it's a unless it's a political piece, in which case you're inviting a response. And that's a long throat clearing to say, it's someone's kid that's made that musical. Why am I going to add to the sum of human unhappiness, right? But yes, will I tell people? Yeah, I mean, obviously, the most obvious thing for me is restaurants. And I suppose because I've got no transferable skills and I've loads of privilege, go to restaurants a lot and I care about food culture. I mean, I would tell all of my friends, but that would be kind of, you know, the same WhatsApp, oh my gosh, I went to this terrible restaurant. But that would be it. But conversely, if I went somewhere amazing, the same echo chamber would hear about somewhere amazing. But no, I wouldn't. It would have to be really bad, as I say and repeat, before I would sort of get online, because of course the disproportionate power I have by virtue of, even though I don't actually terribly prosecute, or that's the wrong way of describing it, I don't necessarily go after social media. I haven't really been on it meaningfully in any interactive way until a couple of years ago. But I don't know, 120 plus 30 whatever thousand followers on Twitter, you know, someone could be having a bad day, or I might just not like the food, or, you know, being served up squirrel might not be my bag. But to go and write something has a disproportionate power. And I need to be constantly mindful of that power and the influence it has before I post. And you know, to really think about that, or to reflect on it, is super important, because some of the cases that I deal with on Judge Rinder, really interestingly in the last few years, have been where people have, for example, posted things online where there's either been a misunderstanding or they've had their experience of the service, which is in no way reflected of the owners of a business, and the disproportionate effect that that can have on a business can be really serious. Let's give you a really quick example if you're interested. I mean, I had a really interesting case where there was a kennel, and the kennel was inspected by the RSPCA and by the local authority, and it was a good kennel. I mean, I personally wouldn't leave my dog there, but I have a pampered pooch who, you know, is better treated than Marie Antoinette, you know. But
we have one. Yeah.
Right. You understand. But, you know, it was definitely a place that any reasonable, sensible dog owner would leave their pet safely. This loving dog owners left their pet there, and a series of events led to the dog dying. I think there was some confusion about died. I can't remember what it was, right? Long and short of it is that the people post online, this kennel is terrible and it killed my dog. Now, that's a kind of shorthand. There were worse things that the person posted on social media. Well, not only was the business shut down, but of course the family, I say of course because it's social media, so people will know, received death threats, etc., etc. They destroyed their business. And now more than ever, the words that you use online, and there's no remedies for the businesses, I might add, because you can't sue for defamation unless it's worth more than £10,000, more than that now, 50, and you're rich. Only the rich, you see, have got reputations to protect. And so that power that we have to post reviews online, and as I say, the disproportionate injury that can do, you've got to be very careful about those words unless you're sure. At the same time as where, for example, and it's especially true of elderly people who don't use online so much, but a number of them write to me, or reviewers of my program, that it matters where, for example, there is a tradesman that's going around and doing shoddy work, that it is really important to photograph it and to describe in as accurate a way as you can the experience you have without your extraneous opinion permeating into the complaint. That will speak for itself.
Have you ever contacted a CEO of a company to complain?
No, but if you read my column, that's a good question. I love that question. Often when I give advice where somebody's met the end of what I call exhausting your other remedies, right? Have you got someone in customer service? Have you escalated? How long have you waited? Often I will, having looked at a letter I've got, realise that this person has clearly done everything conceivable to speak to someone in that particular corporation and that you know that the only person that really has the meaningful power to happily affect the outcome will be a CEO. And I because of the nature of the letters I get, I often, I would say, advise write to the CEO, or that find out who their secretary is, you know. And often what you discover is that not only do you get a response in those circumstances, but in a couple of instances, more than a couple of instances, you find out that the CEO wasn't aware. She often wouldn't have been aware that this is going on, that this company procedure is in place. And actually, she's usually grateful to hear about that this is a problem, especially if you write the letter with, and this is a good letter, which of course is your world. If you write it with kind of mindfulness, I keep using that word, which is overused, but with a kind of, if you like, a disappointed kindness. You know, I really like your company. I used it because I wanted to achieve this. Here's where you fell short. And here's where I feel it could be improved if you've got the time to put that in the letter. And this is a real pity because I didn't want to write to you, but I've exhausted the other people I can write to. And I know that you want to solve this problem, Ms. or Mrs. X, head of the board, CEO. And I know that you don't want your company to be named and shamed in this way because it's unnecessary. I just want my outcome. And I really look forward to hearing from you. And often those types of kind of positively framed letters really achieve so much more than the letter you received today of angry shouting. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're aware of ceoemail.com, aren't you?
I am not aware of ceoemail.com, but I'm going to leave this call and I'm going to look it up. So thank you. I've got something out of this.
That will give you all the email addresses for CEOs. So you don't have to go searching. You just go ceoemail.com and find it. And if it's not there or not up to date, you just email the editor, Marcus, and he will find it for you.
Well, I have learned something, and that is going in my column at some point in the next few weeks. So thank you, Helen.
Oh, it's brilliant. I use it all the time, but it is an interesting one about how some CEOs will respond personally. Very, very few, but some will. Like Octopus Energy, he uses it. He uses the correspondence a lot. I wrote an article a couple of years ago on CEOs who actually use the complaints and actually personally respond because it teaches them so much about the company.
Right. And we forget, like I say, you don't know. I mean, you know, a head of a company, depending on the nature of the nature of the corporate setup, its infrastructure, you know, it could be huge. They don't know, you know, sometimes. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure response varies. But as I say, the framing of the letter and the tone is very important.
Have you ever used ADR?
Alternative dispute resolution through. No, but again, I encourage it. And my show is a version of ADR. So, and I think some of the ombudsman services can be really good. I really like the financial ombudsman. And the reason I like the financial ombudsman is a part of it is I know that they have fantastic ongoing training there. You know, be that in a dispute where an insurer hasn't paid out, for example, you've got an issue with your bank. Actually, the ombudsman service there is a really good space and a good place to begin a complaint. And of course, it won't usually interfere with bringing a complaint elsewhere. And there are a number of ombudsman service people don't use. ABTA, for example, has one, etc. And so those alternative disputes, they're not really alternative. What I'm saying is that they're not court, right? They're effectively, they provide spaces for mediation where they understand both you as a consumer and, of course, the provider. And they've got a statutory obligation to consider what you have to say. I actually think there are things in general that we can be quite proud of that we've set up in the UK. They're quite good. Yeah, not always, but they're quite
some
good.
Some issues,
to be sure, not perfect. Right.
I'll send you. There are some very good schemes out there, but there's some rogue ones as well. And you're going to like this question. Have you ever used the small claims court?
I haven't personally, but I obviously know a lot of judges, and I know a lot of people work in the small claims court, and I still think it's a place we should be really proud of. You know, some people accuse me of doing silly cases from time to time, but you'll be aware that one of the most important cases in English law and for that matter, American law and Australian law and New Zealand law and Canadian law, and wherever we've transported the law from England and Wales, is about two women, I think on the Scottish borders, who open a ginger beer bottle in the 1930s and a masticated snail comes out and one has an attack of the vapours. And she wants to sue someone, and she wants to sue someone who, well, who should she sue? And she hasn't got a contract with anyone. Hasn't got a contract with the person that gave her the ginger beer bottle, the restaurant owner in I think it was a restaurant in a waiting room on a railway station somewhere. And she hasn't got a contract with the manufacturer, but it's caused her injury, a masticated snail. That case is called Donoghue and Stevenson, and it's governed the entire principle of tortious law, right? And it meandered its way to the Supreme Court, which was then the House of Lords. And the main judge in that case stands up and says, who is my neighbour? It's a case about a masticated snail. And so what I love is that even in the small claims court, you know, every judge who works in that court is applying the law. She's applying the law. God bless you, Helen. And
thank you so much.
Your listeners.
Cheers.
Privilege.
Thank
Be
you
well.
so